So let's talk briefly about the drinking context and outcomes. Part of alcohol marketing self regulation is the complaint process. So remember that in a self regulated process, an industry creates their guidelines, creates the rules, implements and enforces the rules, and then adjudicates any potential violations. So, in terms of alcohol marketing, if you see an ad that you think violates the guidelines of a self regulated marketing code, whether the exposure guidelines or the content guidelines, you can submit a complaint and see what happens. And that's what we're going to talk about here is the complaint process, or at least the complaint process that we went through when we actually submitted a complaint. So the ad you see on the screen, this was a Super Bowl commercial published by Bud Light in 2014. It's a very long commercial. I think it was about a minute long during the game. It's about a minute and a half up on YouTube, which is still there. And it was part of their Up for Whatever series. So this guy randomly walks into a bar, supposedly randomly walks into a bar, and is kind of given this night out on the town. He ends up drinking beer in a limo. He meets twins in an elevator with Don Cheadle and a llama. He plays ping pong with Arnold Schwarzenegger and then ends up in the middle on stage in the middle of a rock concert. It's kind of this. The idea is that if you're up for whatever, you drink Bud Light, these really cool things can happen to you. So we reviewed the ad, we watched the ad a bunch of times, and we contended there were 4 violations of the U.S. Beer Institute Marketing Code. And the Beer Institute publishes the marketing codes that govern beer advertising. Bud Light and its producer, AB InBev, is a sponsor of the Beer Institute itself. So we said that there were open containers in a vehicle and excessive alcohol consumption in a moving vehicle, which are both illegal activities and promoting excessive alcohol consumption, which again is against these codes. We said that the llama, which is appealing to children, the band, which was One Republic, are primarily appealing to children and teens. And the celebrities used, such as Don Cheadle and Arnold Schwarzenegger, have been featured in films that are popular among youth. And we could go through their entire filmography, and I guarantee there would have been films that they were featured in that were really more oriented to teens and children. There were 2 female characters. We did not think they appeared to be over 21 years old or sufficiently over 21 years old. And then we said that the ad implies that the successes obtained during the commercial could not have occurred unless the person drank Bud Light. Essentially, Bud Light was the sole reason why these things occurred. Now, that one, the others you can kind of dismiss. We're kind of out on a limb, but that one literally was the message of the ad. That was the firmest ground on what we were kind of putting our line in the sand in. So here's what we did. We wrote up our complaint. We identified all of these different issues we had. We located the guidelines that they were associated with, and we submitted the complaint to the Beer Institute. Now, you would think that they would accept the complaint, look at it judiciously, and then give us a response, but you would be incorrect. Before the complaint was actually seen, we got an email back saying that asking if the complaint was submitted to the producer, which would be AB InBev. I looked at the instructions on the Beer Institute website. It said nothing about submitting complaints to the producer. I looked at the AB InBev website. It had no submission form or submission process for complaints. So we said no, that wasn't the directions, and it has not been submitted to the producer. So the Beer Institute submitted the complaint on our behalf to AB InBev. Within a couple of weeks to a month, they rejected all claims, which was not really all that surprising. Now, when a producer rejects claims of a complaint, the complainant, in this case us, has the right to appeal to the Beer Institute's Code Compliance Review Board, the CCRB. So we appealed. We said, we have this appeal process. We would like to appeal to the CCRB. We were then asked, do you really want to appeal the decision? Are you really sure you want to do this? Of which we said yes. We actually made them do a little bit of work. And then a few weeks later to a month later, they rejected all of our claims. Now, all in all, this process took about 2 to 3 months. The ad was no longer even on the air by the time it was all said and done, which is kind of what we expected. And we didn't really expect any of our complaints to actually go through, even though we had pretty good solid ground for the whole process. So how could this happen? How could an ad whose message is drink our product to have a good time and to do crazy things actually not, like the complaint, not actually work? Well, part of it is how these regulations are actually written. So many of them have very vague language. So one of the guidelines in the guiding principles is that alcohol beverage marketing communication should not suggest that alcohol beverages can enhance physical, sporting, or mental ability. So they use the word suggest. What does that mean? Does it mean that there needs to be a direct link between alcohol and an activity? So I'm drinking and then I go and I run a marathon. I'm drinking and then the girl comes and talks with me. Or is it allowed that as long as alcohol is around, that means that there is a violation of this guideline? There are plenty of loopholes as well. So one of the loopholes that are seen in the U.S. Beer Institute Code is that the guidelines don't apply to materials or messages designed to address alcohol awareness, alcohol abuse, drunk driving, underage drinking, or overconsumption. Now, this is stretching it, admittedly, but each ad typically comes with a responsibility messages. So drink responsibly, be responsible, things along those lines. There are these industry responsibility messages which haven't been tested, and there's really no research saying that they work. It's conceivable that because these messages are within the ad itself, then the industry could, based on this loophole, consider the whole ad a health promotion message, and simply the guidelines no longer apply. Vague language and loopholes. So one final thought. I mentioned the exposure guidelines. The exposure guidelines are based on the population proportion of people who are under 21 in the U.S. in the year 2000. Now, the U.S. Beer Institute and Discus have updated this standard for the 2010 census. They'll probably do it again for the 2020 census. But IARD's guiding principles maintain the use of this 30% standard. And there's a couple of things that are wrong about this. One is that this standard is applied worldwide. Yet most countries actually have lower drinking ages than the United States. So if the drinking age is 18, but the standard is 30%, 30% of that population is not going to be 18 or less. It's going to be 20% of the population. So you're going to actually an ad could be in compliance with this exposure guideline, but you have disproportionate exposure, overexposure of underage individuals. We also need to take into account that the young population, the under 21 population, is shrinking in many countries. So if we just use a standard and don't adjust it over time, like the guiding principles seem to be doing, we're going to continue to overexpose teens and other adolescents. And this 30% standard, and even it's like a 28% standard now in the Beer Institute, includes children who are unlikely to be exposed to alcohol advertising. It includes 0 to 5-year-olds who simply don't watch typically do not watch television, either at the times or the programming that has alcohol advertising. So again, you're overexposing teens and children because you're including young infants and toddlers who simply don't watch TV.